Whenever I work with many of you, the first question I ask is, let's drop the technology, tell me your story. I'm such a big believer in storytelling. Those of you who've worked with me closely keep hearing that phrase. Our next speaker is an expert at that. My favorite line of all time in describing a phenomena is there's an app for that. And I was just telling James Vincent, who worked for 10 years with Steve Jobs at Apple, on this whole issue of storytelling. He coined that in a brief he was just telling me, and Steve picked up that phrase, and it's now become legendary. And I think some of you have heard me say there's an AI for that as the new version of that. So without much delay, I'll invite James on to talk to you about storytelling, which is at least as critical as the technology all of you develop, even though I'm mostly focused on the technology. James?
Thanks, man. Hello, everybody. Thanks, Vinod, for that beautiful introduction. So I'm going to talk to you about storytelling today. Hopefully it'll be interesting. You be the judge of that. Under promise and over deliver. That's what, as soon as my first meeting with Steve, Lee Cloud said to me, don't promise anything, no matter what he asked you the night before. Just, yeah, you got any good stuff? Oh, yeah, well, you be the judge of that. So let's see, you be the judge of this. So we're going to harness the power of storytelling. I'm going to do Lulu, who was on earlier. We're doing a workshop tomorrow. I'm just doing a quick plug for that. Where we go, we're going to allow you guys, we're going to try and help you guys with your storytelling. So that's when we do that. Today, I'm going to do some big stories that you might find inspiring, okay? So, as I click, here we go. All right. So I work with these three guys, and I sort of feel like each one of them's, pretty clear brand, has both head and heart. So that might be a question that you might ask yourself. How logical is your brand, and how much heart has it? So I would present an idea to Steve. He said, my head understands it, my heart doesn't care. Well, my heart's really in love with it, but my head doesn't understand, right? So I'll show you some examples of that. So these three guys all, I think, had very strategic, intentional ideas, both for their product and their marketing. As Steve said, there can be no difference between your product and your marketing and your product. Don't allow yourself to separate those two things. That's what Apple's so good at. And that's actually what Airbnb's also very good at. So I'm going to get into each one of those. I'm going to start here with Brian, because I'm going to end with Apple. So I went to work with Brian in 2015, and something to think about. When you use Airbnb, you bring your best human. Because he's a designer from RISD, right? So he's not your average founder. He's actually very design-led, very creative. This is us at the Innovation Festival, the Fast Company event last September in New York. And you bring your best human, right? So you go on there and you're like, oh, I really love your house, and I'm going to write a little bit on my family, and I'm here, and I love your place. It looks great, and right. And then at the end, you do a review, but you do a private review first, not a public review. So you go, you know what? The little paint missing, or go do that thing and sort that out, and then I'll do a great public review, right? So you take the discourse out of it, and you make sure that the human interaction is a really positive one. So he specifically designs for that, and so that was the product that we had to deal with, and we were trying to figure out how to change the world, and this is what I think what Brian was trying to do. He wasn't changing the way we travel, he was changing the way we live through travel. So think about that. Now, these are all examples of kind of radical shifts in behavior, right? So try and imagine yourself 10 years ago, you never heard of Airbnb, or remember that moment when someone said, I just stayed in an Airbnb. And you're like, what is that? You're like, well, you stay in someone else's home. You're like, what? No, I stay in a hotel. It's like, no, you stay in someone else's home. You were like toenail clippings down the bottom of the bed. There's like some weird pictures of, no, it's fine. It's actually really cool if you do that. But it was strange, right? It was the same. Kind of the same time when you hit the button and the magic of Uber happened, right? And a car started arriving. So the live through travel is actually quite a big thought, because it's about thinking about how you comprehend traveling, right? And so what I ended up doing was going to work with Brian as the head of Magical Trips, which was the experiences product, right? So the experiences are those little things that you do when you're on the trip. And the conversation, Brian's a very intentional CEO, and he said, I'm currently an accommodation company, and I want to IPO as a travel company. So I want to make sure that accommodation gets extended to be travel. So we want to make magical trips be incredible, and people to think of Airbnb first, not last. Right? Oh, I'm going to Paris, so oh, where am I going to stay? Like, wait a second, I'm going to travel. Well, I wonder what Airbnb's got, right? So you can see that in the marketing today. That's the kind of situation they flipped. And so this was a launch that looks very much like an Apple keynote, because I just spent 11 keynote years building keynotes with Steve. So this one looked a bit like a keynote, and Brian's a big fan. So, and we're still good friends today. So don't go there, live there was a piece of communication. Don't go there, live there. Right, turned out, here's a great example, right? Americans going to Paris. Do you love Paris? Yeah, I love the idea of Paris, but when I went there, it was kind of shitty, and then we got treated badly, and all the American tourists were all in one restaurant, and then we stood in a long line at the Louvre, and it rained, and then they're all rude, and we came home. It wasn't really that romantic at all. Oh, turned out, right? So, well, what if you stayed in Jean's place in the Marais, and you walked out, and there's a little list of the local places, and asked for so-and-so, and get the croissant at 8 o'clock. From here, not there, that kind of thing. Then suddenly you feel at home. So don't go there, live there. Okay? So piece of communication, could talk about that for an hour and a half, but I only have 5 minutes. So that's the Airbnb example. I started with the product. Always start with the product. Think about the values of the marketing, put the two things together. I think often, oh, I don't have time for brand. You don't have time for brand? Brand is how you feel when you use the product. Right? I worked with David at Roblox in 2018, and he said something to me that, you know, I think something like 98.9% of my users only have a relationship with Roblox when they're inside it. They're using the product. And I don't even think there is a 1.1%. Everybody has a relationship with my brand through the product. So our work together was about how the product could express the brands, and I think Roblox still manages to be a relatively safe place for kids to play, because it's blocky and it's sort of real, and they're very, very intentional. Very intentional, blocky, real, human, all kind of rules that we agreed together as they developed the product. So product, marketing, marketing, product. Okay. I'm going to flip now to something completely different, social media. Cut to 2018. I'm in Venice Beach, California. So is this fella. And if you remember around that time, social media really was exploding, and I don't mean in a good way. I mean, well, maybe in a good way with the metrics, but in a bad way in terms of like, oh my God, social media is so toxic and it's terrible. And around that time, of course, everybody was like, well, it's terrible. Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, they're all bad, right? And we started working together, and I said to Evan, we need to shift you out of that list, right? Because you're different. I think you're different. And so we worked for a little bit, and we walked on the beach one day, and I was walking along with him, and I said, lying to strangers, truth to friends. And he stopped. Yeah, I like that. What's that? He's like, that's what we're going to work together on. Lying to strangers is what people do on social media. You don't have 15,000 friends, and you didn't have a good day just because you posted a picture of a sunset. Sorry, you didn't, right? Oh, there's a happy family. Oh, well, we're getting a divorce, but I thought I'd post a nice picture of the family, right? Over to Snapchat. They're not going to save the world, right? And we're not pretending they are. But I have 2 teenage kids. They go on Snapchat. Their real friends are there, 15, 20 friends in it, right? And they're really goofy, right? Really goofy, really real, right? And so it's still Snap Maps, Snapchat. It has a place that's very clear in people's minds. And so the irony, of course, and I love paradoxes. Tesla's paradox is amazing. Performance and sustainability. Ludicrous mode, and yet you're saving the planet, right? Paradoxes are where it's cool. The very first paradox, if you remember, Steve was up there, and it was technology and the liberal arts. At the time, was a huge paradox, right? Because everyone was buying kind of ugly Dell computers, and they had software in them that wasn't very pretty, and the two companies didn't talk to each other, so it didn't work very well. So anyway, here he's got stuff that disappears, but builds lasting friendship, right? And so our job was to tell that story, and it ended up being around an idea called Real Friends. This was something I snapped to him in 2018. I think this was like 2020. They came out with a piece of communication. So, and a bunch of other impact on the product and ways in which he talked about things which differentiated the storytelling of Snap versus other social media. So, okay. So that was just a sort of just the starter. I'm going to get into Apple now and tell you some stories. So I was living in New York in 1999, and I got a call, you want to work with Steve Jobs? I was on a plane within a day, realizing that I was having too much fun in New York and I needed to probably go to California where things were happening around that time. If you remember the dot-com thing, 2000, around that time. So I'm going to tell you this story, and I'm going to tell you my version of this story. This is not, I sort of wrote a book and decided not to be the tell-all guy, but this was the outset of kind of the 5 chapters. I'm going to tell you those. So this is this paradox, right? Liberal arts, technology. Maybe you want to look for your own paradox. Maybe there's something interesting there, because that's where people get interested. There's great storytelling in paradoxes. He was the first humanist. This is actually, sadly, the last time he took a public stage. But this is how important that idea was to him. So, back to the thing I just said about the other 2 guys. Steve didn't set out to change the computer industry, although, of course, he did. He set out to change the way people think creatively. Okay, so think of how devices used to have lots of buttons on them and a very small screen, and you try being creative with a postage stamp, right? And computers couldn't do very much and didn't look very nice. So let me tell you that story. Okay. How long we got? We're going good. Okay. So I'm going to give you a potted 5 chapters as kind of like, not that, oh my God, I've got to take 40 years, because you'll probably take 40 weeks or 40 months in today's world building a brand. But they did go on for a decade, and maybe even still, be the biggest, largest, most loved company in the world. The most recent iPad ad aside, they're still much loved. Anyway, not on my watch. Anyway, so 40 years ago, I'm sure you all know, Ridley Scott shot an amazing commercial, and it was George Orwell, 1984. The enemy at the time was Big Blue. Sort of didn't really matter. The issue was like big and boring, right? We're going to be, right, and this, as you remember, there were all these, sort of drone-like, Blade Runner-like, right, people coming in, filing in, and then this woman with bright red shorts and a big hammer swings it and smashes, and this is why it won't be like 1984, okay? So I call that defining the enemy, right? So again, I am not trying to tell you have to go through 5 steps and it'll take you 40 years. But I'm telling you, maybe just as an inspiration or a mental model to think about, find out what your enemy is. You don't always need to have an enemy, and the enemy might not be a person or a thing. It might be an issue. In culture, that's often a lot where, and in fact, when I get on to talk about AI, which I'm going to brazenly try to do at the end here, a great brand, a great company catches an issue that's in culture that hasn't yet found form in a product, in a message, in a conversation. So if you can figure out what that is, and that's kind of what I try to do. So, okay, around that time, that's what this was. IBM was the average, and the Mac came out, 1984. Okay. So, second phase. Obviously, a lot happened between 1984 and 1997. If anybody knows, Steve got thrown out of his own company. He went off and created Pixar and Next and did a bunch of other stuff, had a lovely family, and came back in 97 as the interim CEO, and then stuck around. And Think Different, one of my favorite campaigns, and a lot of creative people's favorite campaigns. And the idea, here's to the crazy ones. The people crazy enough to change the world are the ones that do. And this was around that time, they were almost bankrupt, but there were still thousands of people driving around with a little Apple sticker on the back of the car, right? To everyone's chagrin, like, those guys they're done. It's like, no, I'm a believer, right? And so this awoke the sleeping giant of the creativity and the idea. And then Steve came back and created a whole bunch of products, iMac and iBook and all those things. The real big invention, and I arrived sort of in between these 2 moments, for me was the shift to the beginning of a supercomputer in your pocket, right? I guarantee everyone in this room has an iPhone in their pocket or one designed very similarly to the iPhone. Well, how do you start that? I'm going to show you a model later about how you transform, how you change attitudes and behaviors. And it's sort of a 3-step model. And you can't connect the dots looking forwards. You have to figure out where I'm going, and then you work backwards, right? So I'll tell you that in a minute. I'll step you through the story first. So years ago in a former life, I was a drummer in a not very good band, or a not very good drummer in a very good band. I can't remember, one of those. But my hope was that I'd be on a stage, but not with a clicker. Anyway, that didn't work out, so here I am. And this actually, Vinod very kindly said there's an app for that's his favorite line. 1,000 songs in your pocket is my favorite line. Now remember this moment. This was, no one was paying for music. Everyone was stealing it from Napster and LimeWire, right? 2000. So everybody is nodding? Everybody remember that moment? No one even knew what media was. What is media? Media is a thing. You put it inside another thing. A Walkman, right? A tape, a thing. What? You plug it in and what? Right? Okay, so we need to tell stories to get people to understand what the hell this thing is. So there are actually two parts to this. The other part was 99 cents for your favorite song, which was iTunes, which was, oh, you're going to pay 99 cents for your favorite song? No, I'm going to steal it for nothing. Oh, okay, great. It's going to be shitty quality, and I'm going to put it on a Rio player, and it's going to have 37 songs in the wrong order, but who cares? I got it for free. It's like, people will pay if you give them if you give them a really good product experience, they'll pay $1. Would you pay $1 for your favorite song? What's your favorite song? Apparently it's Stairway to Heaven, or Can't Get No Satisfaction, or something like that, right? And you go, would you pay $1 for that? Yeah. Oh, and the artist gets paid too? Yeah, that's not bad. Okay, good. But I need a device. Okay, so, and I know it doesn't sound like a lot right now, but 1,000 songs in your pocket sounded like a lot back then, right? When you had 12 songs that skipped in your pocket, right? With your Walkman, your Discman, probably. So 1,000 songs in your pocket was a brief I wrote, I think. I can't remember. I was certainly in the room at the time. And the Silhouettes campaign became this. Does everybody remember the Silhouettes campaign? We did the U2 thing and the Coldplay, and we did Bob Dylan and Eminem. And first we did discovery of music. So we found all these bands because we wanted to prove that iTunes was the place to discover music. So we discovered Jet and a bunch of other Black Eyed Peas and a bunch of others. And then we did the U2 and all of those big things. So 1,000 songs in your pocket signals the future, right? Because Steve was like, okay, technologies are not ready yet for the phone that everyone's desperate for. This is a mythical conversation that I never had with him, but let's imagine that he said to me, they're not ready yet, but they will be, so let's begin a behavior, and let's pick one thing that we can do really well, music. Something that people love, right? Everybody loves music. And they had a shitty music experience, right? Do you remember how magical it was when you got your first iPod? Freaking amazing. That was the luckiest guy in the world, because that was like the first big product I had to launch. And I was a sort of mediocre musician, so I was able to at least relate to the musicians that we were then bringing in. So there's the beginning of that phase. And there's another phase here, which is also, I think, important in this storytelling progression, which was one day, so every Wednesday from 1 till 3, I went up to see Steve. And my job was to chair the meeting in front of Steve. Now, sometimes he'd just come in and go and just talk for a couple of hours. I'd be like, okay, fair enough, never mind. It doesn't matter. And he's like, okay, what do you got, James? And I'm like, I got 3 things. I got this, and this, and this. He's like, oh, okay, great, let's do that one. Okay, good. There's always one conversation, and of course he would call me and email me or whatever it was we did back then, every single day, every single hour, it seemed. But this was a showing. He came in one day and he said, we have 3% market share with Mac. 3%. He said, I don't want 3%. Let's forget it. Let's stop making computers. You know what I want? I want 90% market share. Now, if you hung out with Steve, this seemed like a perfectly normal thing, although I was sort of falling off my chair at the time. And I realized, of course, because there was always a method to that, which was he wanted 90% of computers over $1,000. Meaning he wanted to change the entire category from being a commodity that you bought with a Dell and a piece of jammed-in Windows over the top of DOS or whatever that was, right? And it all kind of ugly and not very good. So pay a bit more and get a better experience. So he wanted 90% of everything. And right now, everything over $1,000 either is a MacBook or, strangely enough, looks like a MacBook if you squint your eyes, because they basically copy the design. Anyway. You can tell I've still got Apple underpants on. Speaking of Lulu's underpants reference. So that was a very important showing. They were better. So it wasn't just all sort of big brand stuff. And then, of course, finally, there's an app for that. And that's Vinod's favorite line. There's an app for that. There's an app for that. Now, why there's an app for that? Well, the mad thing, of course, when I first saw the phone, and there were apps, and I was like, I think people are going to go, where's the buttons? Right? And we're like, oh, really? We're going to go? Yeah. And that's, of course, what everybody did, right? You don't need to reveal it, but I'm sure a lot of you were using BlackBerry or something like it, or a Nokia if you're European, or a not very smart Palm Pilot phone thing. Anyway, so 37 buttons and the postage stamp internet, and it was kind of not great, right? But you thought you were super because it was super. There's an app for that was trying to think about this model as if it's a Swiss Army knife. It can do anything, right? So would you like to go on holiday? There's an app for that. Would you like to buy a car? There's an app for that. Would you like to go on, oh, there's an app for that too. There's an app for just about anything on the iPhone. We did 5 years of ads that just did that. So again, Steve was like, let's just keep doing it until absolutely everybody understands this new mental model of what a phone can be, which is basically a supercomputer in your pocket. Okay, you can tell me to shut up with Steve and Apple stories. I'll probably go on forever. So I'm going to stop there. But why did I share that with you? Because I believe telling stories allow people to understand things they've never seen before, and help you, if you're in the moment of bringing it in, to be seen as being part of that change. And I mean that in a good way. So a story well told, that transition from a single-use device, an iPhone, which is a supercomputer, and there's an app for that. Moved, right, an entire, there we go, in the last 15 years of commerce, the number of people with app-based businesses in this room, it's probably a pretty high percentage. So, okay. So I could carry on telling story. I have 5 minutes. That's perfect. So I'm going to take on a controversial issue, which is the total absence of a story of AI outside of this and rooms like it. So I would argue that we're doing a shitty job at arguing that AI can be freaking awesome. And everybody believes, what culture believes, is that AI will have a great impact. But their question is, will it be good? Because everybody's like, it's going to have a great impact, but ooh, careful. It's going to be fucking bit shitty, you know? Okay. Turns out, of course, I mean, every day I hear so many examples of how AI is going to solve, like, from, I don't know, let's go, like AI, biotech, synthetic biology. It's going to cure cancer. It's going to, right? It's going to relieve your lives. It's going to help and assist. It's going to allow you to, a million good things. So we need to tell this story. And of course, I was talking with Vinod last night, and he was like, I've been saying this for a long time. I'm like, oh shit, hopefully I'm not stealing your thunder here. But hopefully, maybe I'll say something that you and I can gang together and help tell this story. Okay, so we need to tell the story of AI. Otherwise, culture, if you don't tell a story, then culture tells it for you. And actually, just to steal, Vinod said, the problem is that journalists are a little threatened by AI, so they don't write positive stories about it. Right? So we've got to flip that. We've got to talk about all these amazing stories. You're all probably desperate to tell me how awesome life can be with AI. Right? So let's go. I'm going to do a potted history for you because I want to think about where we've been going and where we're going in the future. So, of course, please forgive, Steve used to laugh at my inability to understand technology, but he thought if that was compensated for my ability to tell stories, then I was okay. So I'm going to give you the potted history, and of course, everyone in this room knows this better than me. But my very, very simple version of this is that for the last 80 years, we've been building the power to compute. Right? We've been digitizing reality. We've been building from the bottom up. Right? So we've got processors and multiprocessors and networking, and then we've got, right, and all the way through, there you go, all of this stuff from vacuum tubes to CPUs to GPUs to ASICs to quantum to wherever it's going, right? And you guys know this stuff way better than me. But more importantly, AI is flipping the conversation. It's moving from the power to compute to the power to comprehend. Context. Power to comprehend, right? So real-world data, sensors, multimodal, all the reasons you'll all be putting your hands up with a list of things that mean, yeah, it's understanding reality, and it's allowing me as a human to understand what's going on around me. How cool is that? The power to comprehend and understand what's going on around you. So why are we doing such a poor job of telling that story? I think we're stuck in the shock absorber, right? So this is a model I use for like very new technologies that, you know, require significant shifts in the way that you know, another Steve quote, when you look at the world and you realize it was created by people no smarter than yourself, you realize you can change things, right? Meaning, well, okay, that was the model, but now there's a model shift, but no one is telling that story very well. So we're in the shock absorber. Everybody's worried. I was telling friends of mine in New York yesterday, or Saturday, I'm going out to this conference, and I'm going to talk about AI, and they were like, oh, that's scary. I think it was a director or a producer or something. Yeah, they're going to make movies in like 5 minutes. And so creative people are very scared. And I won't, yeah. And friends of mine were like, yeah, you know, we're a bit worried. You know, professional, creative people, like, we're a bit worried. Like, where's the good in this, right? What we need is a bridge. A bridge is The new with the familiar, right? Steve was always like, don't do new on top of new. This is a good code for you guys too. Don't do new on top of new. You're going to do this new thing on this new device. No, those things are in Brookstone at the airport, okay? The things, you think about like the iPad introduction. It was like, do we need this? I don't know. Well, let's look at the 7 things that you do every day and decide whether it's better on the phone or on the computer, right? So if you ever want to do, just go watch some of those keynotes. They're so good. The iPod keynote is amazing. The phone, are you getting it yet? Is amazing. iPad is amazing. There are others. So anyway, bridging the new with the familiar is very, very important for you to figure out. So let's bring them along, shall we? Let's explain that the things that they're doing currently can be done in a new way, but only better, right? So, and then in the future, we can go to a springboard. And of course, in the past, I'm going to use that model and say that the iPod was the shock absorber. Oh my God, right? And then the supercomputer was the bridge, and the App Store really was there's an app for that, let's go, right? Which is why it's Vinod's favorite line. So that was a story well told. You can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking back. What does that mean? That means you have to have some idea of where we're going, and you have to help people get there, right? And I think Lulu had a model very similar to this. So I was a host of a Fast Company podcast, and at the end of 12 episodes, which if you have insomnia, you should listen to one of them one night, might cure it. But I said, everyone's talking about an intelligent future, and my sense of AI is actually that the future is just going to be a less dumb version of today. Meaning, a few years from now, you'll look back and you'll go, do you remember when we used to have to, right? It's very similar to do you remember when we used to do dial-up? I mean, that was ridiculous, right? It really was ridiculous, right? Remember when we used to have to, well, obviously these things are going to happen much, much faster, but really the big sense here is, it's just a less dumb all those things, you don't need to do those things. They're not helpful to you. And actually, imagine if those things were done by AI, you would have a real-time sense of everything that's happened, and you wouldn't waste your time doing the wrong thing, either as a company or as an individual. So I'm going to take a really tough jump at this and say, the question is, will AI leave humans behind? I think that's what everyone's asking. I think we need to figure it out. I don't know whether Sam's probably not here yet, but I'll be drilling him later. It's about whether he or anyone else, Vinod or some gang of merry men and women, can tell a good story about the future of AI. So I think the world is waiting for it, and they need it. And I think there's so many great stories in here that need to be brought to life. Because life will be better. Because we'll have a full understanding, and we'll get to mutual understanding, and we'll cut through all of the waste, so much of the friction. So there is a story to be told. It's really a story that needs to be told in order for the future to be embraced in the way that all of you need it to be. That's it. That's what I was going to do today. I'm done. What's your story? We have a workshop tomorrow, so please join us if you're interested. Thank you.